This is happening.
How come you're shaking?
What are you talking about?
You're shaking.
Yeah,
You are.
I know I am. Welp, no risk, no reward, am I right? Oh man, it's finally here. 3, 2, 1. Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. If you're new to the channel, which I assume that probably some of you are if you're clicking on this video, my name is Jeff, this is JH Motor Club, and pretty much anything with a motor we like to get our hands on. Also, if you're new to the channel, be sure you hit that subscribe button to keep up with the KLX450R build here. And of course, as you're watching the video, if you have any suggestions, thoughts about the build, be sure to leave them down below. If you didn't watch to the end of my last KLX351 video, let that be a lesson to watch to the very end of my video, because we like to do stuff like that. So quick background before we unbox that thing. Obviously, I have my KX450X here, which you guys saw at the end of last video if you watched that part, and then my KLX351, which kind of blew up. Last video we determined that the wrist pin is not being held in anymore due to the circlip just somehow recessing itself into the groove. That was causing our knocking engine with the 351 build here, ported head, bored throttle body, obviously big board to 351, you know, custom tune, exhaust, all that stuff. But I have said before that if this bike ever does blow up, I might as well 450 swap it. And gosh dang, guess what? We're doing that. Another thing, if you guys remember, I made a future plans video for the KLX351 before it blew up. And my plan was basically to turn this KLX into kind of a race enduro bike. So, of course, we have the motor now, but we're not gonna forget about the rest of the bike. Subframe, forks, rear suspension, all that. We're gonna fix that as well, but on top of all that, we now have a 450 motor. And now, we're gonna be building a street legal KLX450R. So I'm sure a lot of you guys have questions about what's gonna happen with the KLX here. So we have two things to talk about in this video. Obviously, how are we gonna stuff a 450 motor into this KLX frame? And then the other thing, what's gonna happen with the 351 motor? So there's timestamps for both of those in the scrolling bar or whatever it's called. If you watched the last video, you guys know that there's some implications to getting a new piston for the 351. But without further ado, let's go ahead, unbox the 450 motor and get into the first topic. All right, so this thing was supposed to get here on the 13th, but I guess somehow, you know, things going on in the world, it got delayed to the 18th. Or not the 18th, today's the 16th, who am I kidding? They said that they got this all boxed up in a wooden crate, and it does look like we have a wooden crate, so that is a plus. Don't cut towards yourself, children. Do not follow what I am doing. Oh, it's like Christmas morning. Well, that works. Well, looks like we need a drill. All right, 3, 2, 1. Nice. And there it is, basking in all of its glory. Wow, would you look at that? What an absolute wonderful piece of machinery right there. So what we have right here is a 2020 KX450 motor. It was raced for one season, and the top end was rebuilt. New piston, new clutch, new water pump, and there's something else missing. Can't remember it right now. Since this thing is a 2020, that means we're gonna have electric start, fuel injection. It is a 5-speed. So it's basically the same motor that's in my 2021 KX450X, but the gear ratios are probably a little bit closer than that. And I believe for 2021, they went with a bigger clutch versus the 2020 model here. So basically with the 2020 motor, EFI, electric start, we're trying to build the 2021 KLX450R that Kawasaki won't build for us. We're gonna go ahead and build it ourselves. So as you can see, we just have the motor here, we have the starter on. So let's go ahead and get into how I'm gonna put that in the KLX. So obviously we're going to strip the whole bike down here on the KLX. Of course, take the motor out, all the electronics, because we're going to be running the electronics from the KX450. KX450, I need an ECU, wiring harness, throttle body, of course clutch. Oh yeah, and another critical part is the fuel pump. I'm not sure if I want to try and adapt a KX450 fuel tank and fuel pump to the KLX frame, or if I want to try and adapt the KX fuel pump and adapt it to the KLX fuel tank. I'm thinking if the KX tank isn't too big and we can make it fit on the KLX frame with some custom mounts or something, that might be the way to go, but I'm not 100% sure on that yet. I'll go ahead and take the plastics off the KX and see if that's a viable option. Those are the main things that we're going to need to get this thing running in the bike. I'm probably going to stick with the stock radiators on the KLX here for now and run probably a dual fan setup with a switch, because the KX450X, it gets pretty hot on the trails. I've dumped some coolant once by just sitting and letting it idle, so I figured that we should be able to run a dual fan setup with the stock radiators. But if it doesn't work, that's something we're gonna have to upgrade, but we might as well try. Now, if you watched to the end of the last KLX351 video, you saw me taking measurements, but of course I had taken measurements before that. 17 inches right there. Now if we go over to the KLX300, same thing as the 250. We go ahead and measure to the bottom as best as we can, and we are also at 17 inches tall. KX450 motor, longest point here is about 13 inches with the 351 swing arm bolt to the front of the motor. Again, we're 13 inches. Width doesn't really matter in terms of stator cover to clutch cover, but what does matter is the length of this right here, and my measurements were correct when I had it in the KX450. We are at about 3.5 inches. On the KLX 250, I can't get it in there to show you guys, but we are at 4.5. Try and take my word for that. There you go. We're at about 4.5. So that means swapping in this 450 motor into the KLX. We're not going to have to machine down the cases or anything, but there's more to physical size with the motor swap on a motorcycle. One of them being is the sprocket alignment. Now we plan to use the KLX wheel setup. So what I did, so I took a measurement from the end of the case on the KLX to the chain, and we're at about 1 inch. On my 450 here, we are at about 1.5 inches. So in order to get the sprocket to line up, and since we have extra room with the KX450 motor here on the swing arm bolt, since this is only 3.5 inches, we should be able to move the KX motor over to the right side of the bike as if you were sitting on it, and that should get us very close to getting the sprocket in a straight line. KX mounting brackets. We have one on the front of the motor, one for the cylinder head here, and then one down here on the motor. KLX, same thing. We have one on the front, one down here on the motor, and then of course the swing arm, one up top for the cylinder head. Now, are these going to line straight up? No, of course not. But my dad has a friend who is certified in fabrication. He has all the certificates. So we're going to go down and see him down in Central Oregon to fab up some mounts to get the 450 motor placed into the KLX frame, which is why I also bought something else to help me get down there. Next area of concern, throttle body, feeding this fire-breathing 450 motor. So you can see that the throttle body intake is kind of cocked over to the left. On the KLX, it's cocked over to the right. My plan for intake on the 450 motor in the KLX is we're going to try and keep the stock air box in place here, which means that we're going to have to get an air duct from over here to over here. We could always do the pod filter thing on the end of throttle body, but I really don't want to do that. I want to keep the air box because there's a lot of physics that go into an air box, flow, fluid dynamic stuff. While the stock KLX one may not work with the KX450 throttle body, I'm sure we'll be able to find a duct that'll work with the KX450 motor to feed some air into this thing for maximum rippage. Now another thing I did think about is the exhaust routing. So as you can see, the center frame piece on the KX is about 2 inches, if it'll focus. On the KLX, it is less than 2 inches. We're at about 1.75 inches. So we're gonna have some extra room to route that stock header here. And with the motor moved to the right as well, we're gonna have even more clearance for that exhaust to come out. Now, we may have to get it bent to go behind the frame on the KLX here. That 450 exhaust with that massive bomb, we're gonna have to probably get it bent to fit through here, if it'll even fit through there. There's gonna be a lot of things to figure out, but I think we're off to a good start in terms of figuring out how we're gonna fit this motor in here. So that just about covers everything now for how we're gonna get the 450 motor into the KLX frame. Now the other question you may be wondering about, what about the KLX351 motor? So as you guys saw in last KLX video, we found the issue with the motor, and I just wanted to get a new piston, but there's some implications to that. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks to get a new piston, and I would really like to get a couple more videos with the 351, especially having my brother's 300 to compare it to now. But knowing that and how long it's going to take, I think I'm just going to start tearing this motor out of the KLX and get to work on the 450 swap. With the KLX sitting like this, kind of a dead asset if you want to look at it that way for the channel here. And I'd really like to get this bike up and running again, and I think the best way to do that is to go ahead and start on the 450 swap. Now hold on, before you get all mad, this motor isn't going anywhere, and well, once it's rebuilt, I kind of have another idea for it. So if you've been following the channel, you guys know that I have one more thing left to do to this motor. 2 things, I guess, if you consider the tuning. Now I think there's going to be a way to fix that ignition pull up top with some information that I have gained. So there's that issue. And then the cams is simply just getting the cams and putting them in the bike. So you may be wondering, you're taking this motor out, what shall you do with that motor if you don't have another KLX? And that's where one of my crazy ideas comes into play yet again. Now recently I saw a video talking about how 450s have too much power. A lot of newbies hop on them and hurt themselves. And it does have a lot of power, but I am getting to the point where I can manage the power, and it's becoming a useful tool rather than a hindrance. But in that video, the guy talked about how motocross bikes shouldn't be 250s, they shouldn't be 450s, they should be a 350. Now, I think you guys see where I'm going with this. So my idea would be, once the 450 swap is done, this will be sometime down the road of course, get the 351 motor fixed, get the ignition pull removed, the biggest cams in there that we can, and swap it into a KX250 frame. Of course, I would have to obtain one first. Now with the cams and the tuning fixed, the 351 motor should be somewhere around 35 to 37, I'm guessing, and generously, maybe 40 wheel horsepower. The KX250 motors, they make around 40 horsepower when they're all uncorked, and then I think the race motors probably make a little bit more than that. But the whole idea would be to continue the saga of the 351 and show the potential of a motor and a chassis that is set up for something like enduro. It's lightweight, has good suspension already, but it would be able to lug down real low in the RPM range, less clutch work, kind of making the ultimate lightweight trail bike that could even do motocross if you wanted to, something that people have complained about with the KLX for a long time. So basically we would be taking a KX250 and turning it into a KX350, making the ultimate trail weapon, a motor that won't flame out easily, a bunch of torque, still has enough power and top end, lightweight suspension. But we're not to that point yet. Obviously we don't have a KX250 frame to swap the motor into, nor do we have the 351 motor fixed, but I figured that I would share my idea with you guys now to show you that I am not done with the 351 motor, even though we are swapping it out for a KX450. So there you guys have it, build series part 1 of the 2021 KLX450R build. We got the motor, We have a plan as to how we're going to get it in the bike, and we even have an idea for the 351 motor. But like I said, I think I'm just going to start on the teardown of the motor, so that way we can get started on this thing. So hopefully maybe I can have my own KLX to ride this summer. But thank you guys for checking out the video. Be sure you are subscribed to keep up with this build. Comment down below your thoughts on the build, any questions you have about it as well, suggestions, anything like that. And the biggest thing is sharing it to your friends, those who may enjoy it or find this build interesting. Like I said, I know some people have had the idea to do this, but they've always got shut down on the forums because people have said it'll be too much work, whatever it may be. Be sure to give the video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed, or you're excited for this build to begin. But like I said, if you're into motorsports, you're in the right place. With all that being said, join the club, and I'll see you in the next one.